Today we're talking about a short horror story that bravely challenged Victorian ideals. It broke people's perception of childhood innocence, and with its ambiguity remains one of the most discussed short stories. It is, of course, Gabriel Ernest by Saki. HH Munro was born during the reign of Queen Victoria in what is now Myanmar, and with his writing loved to satirize social pretension and the bad qualities of stupid people. His derision for them is very evident. He was raised by two strict religious aunts, and later in his stories made sure to feature a lot of aunts as a way to get his revenge. It's also important for context to mention his homosexuality and his attempt to repress his nature. It's interesting to see potential influences of Wilde. His epigraphs seem to contain allusions to Wilde's work. However, Wilde is someone people didn't talk about during that time, for obvious reasons. Gabriel Ernest begins with, "There is a wild beast in your woods." This is addressed to our protagonist Van Chiel by his artist friend, Cummingham, who is, when she was driving Cummingham to the station because Cummingham is leaving, and their friendship isn't a very warm one per se, but it doesn't seem to matter because Van Chiel talks incessantly and he's quick to dismiss anything he doesn't understand, which includes the statement, "There's a beast in your woods." And Van Chiel, in his arrogance, rushes, of course, to deny everything immediately and say that there is nothing more forbiddable than foxes. And, Cunningham, of course, being friends with him, maybe perhaps it's not so much a friendship as one person forcing themselves onto another person, in the regard that he doesn't really seem to understand that Cunningham doesn't love to talk, that he would rather, sit in silence. Cunningham, knowing this quality of his friend, just stays silent, and eventually he knows that Van Chiel will ask later, "So what about that beast by the woods?" His first reaction is to dismiss what he does not understand, and only then catch up and actually ask, "Hey, maybe I should listen to this, it's my wood, right?" Everything is written in third-person omniscient narration, and this is very useful because it helps the reader to actually see some of the qualities and to really observe just what kind of people we're talking about here. And Van Chiel very easily lets flattery go to his head. There's a passage about his aunt saying that he can identify a few bluebells. He's quite the naturalist, so he can distinguish these other aspects of nature quite well. And of course, identifying a few plants doesn't necessarily make you this expert in all of nature, all of the trees, all of the flowers, but Van Chiel lets that flattery go to his head, and he does fancy himself the expert. He uses his outings to the wood to find new topics for his conversation, to show off to his friends, to say, "Look at me, I know that these bluebells are blossoming right now." And of course, everybody else knows that these bluebells are blossoming, but they just let him carry on. And he's a very monotone and dry sort of person. Van Chiel figures that, I'm going into the woods to find new topics for my conversations anyway, and he heads there. Also, of course, out of curiosity, he will never admit it, but he wants to see what his friend is talking about. And in the woods, there's a boy of about 16, sprawled naked, and the descriptions are quite Twilight-ish in its very lusty sensuality. But there's something of a beast in there. Listen, he's laying asprawl. His limbs are drying in the sun. There's a tigerish gleam in his eyes. He has a lazy watchfulness. He's very animalistic in his nature. And there's a line that this is the first time that Van Chiel actually needs to think about what he's going to say. So he's in shock because look at this beautiful young boy naked in his woods, and these descriptions of him almost as an animal. There's something so raw in his nature. And this is exactly what I mentioned at the beginning about it challenging the ideals of the time, because there's this association of childhood, and I think now as well, with innocence. And this is directly saying that, actually, just because he looks like an angel doesn't necessarily mean that he's an angel, because look at him. We're seeing clearly that he's this beast-like creature. He even admits to eating children, and yet we see only his angelic face, and Van Chiel doesn't go beyond that. And I think part of what makes the story so effective, not only that it's a blend of genres and it approaches the satire element well, the passage about bluebells is quite amusing, but also that it blends its horror in quite well too. It's a sort of reimagining on that old tale that we've all heard as children when grandparents would scare us and say, "Don't go into the wild, wild woods. There's monsters living there, right? Stranger danger, don't talk to people you don't know." And I mean, of course we have to talk about the fact that it seems that Van Chiu is actively repressing that part of him that his first reaction is to say like, wow, like when he looks at the boy, right? And I think that the boy is perhaps Van Chiu's alter ego in a way, because as much as Van Chiu is repressing his nature and he's this parish counselor and he's very indoorsy and he's very monotone and he can't even bring himself to say anything new, he just comments on things that people already know, like the bluebells, to not really provoke anything, to just chatter about nothing, essentially. There is this boy who's wild, who lives outside, who can't be tamed, who's young, who's beautiful, and I think they're very much like opposite characters. There's a very big contrast between the two, and of course the setting of the forest, the natural setting for the boy, and, well, the house where Van Chiu spends his life with his abusive aunt. Well, not really abusive, but sort of not really necessarily the most interesting person either. The abusive was in Saki's history. The whole scene, as Cunningham actually comments on later, it's very reminiscent of Fawn in pagan mythology. So just this like youthfulness and this lust, it's very, very present, and it's very, very tangible in the descriptions as well, and in, of course, the insinuations that are made. And I think that it's important to note that at the end, it's actually the boy who wins. So this wildness wins. It's again a message to say that you can't really tame it and you can't really stop it. It's implied that the aunt is foolish in her desire to protect the boy, because there is no need to protect this part, as Saki says, but perhaps we need to embrace it and to accept it first. And as Van Chiu's first reaction is to, first of all, bite down his initial thoughts, which is to say, wow, look at this boy, and to actually interrogate the boy. It's a defense mechanism. He doesn't want to talk about what's in front of him and his own feelings. He doesn't want to acknowledge them, so instead he says, what are you doing in my woods? And the boy calmly replies with a hint of patronage in his voice, because the boy is very composed, very self-assured. He says that actually, well, I live here. And he doesn't really take Van Chiu's, well, you can't live in the woods, as an answer. He just does. And he later moves on to very disturbing things that escalated quickly. He'll say, oh, well, actually, I feed on flesh. I am most active in the night. Again, the insinuations. And then he says that, well, actually, my favorite flesh is child flesh. And it's sort of implied that this is how people saw homosexuality. But even in the things that he says, there feels a very sort of danger too, because we as the reader realize that, well, of course, this boy can't just be a simple boy. And so there's this like slowly building horror. There's a danger in this attraction, as there was during the time, because, well, it was a crime, right? You could get killed for this. People were absolutely intolerable of even thinking about it. And it was seen as something that was akin to baby eating in Saki's eyes, so this is why he's representing it this way. And Van Chiu continues his conversation, and the boy remarks that, well, actually, it's better that I'm here rather than in your house. And so Van Chiu decides to try and chase the boy out, but as he follows him, he falls. And again, there's this contrast between the boy's elegance, his poise, his control, his animalistic ability to be there fully in control of his surroundings, and Van Chiu literally falling over nothing. And as Van Chiu falls, his hand instinctively goes to a throat like this. And again, there's that element of there being something almost sensual in it. So even though Van Chiu, with his arrogant personality, who understand that perhaps it's not the best decision to kick out a random werewolf guy who he found in the woods, he still, even with his refusal to admit it, with his desire to continue chasing the boy away, his hand still goes to his throat, his body betrays him. And then eventually the boy just laughs. Well, but the laugh is more like a snarl, again, this animal side, this vicious side, and the boy moves away. And Van Chiu simply goes home, and as he's going home, he's thinking, I'm a parish counselor, I can't have this nude boy on my land. The fact that he thinks he can't have him on my land, he's thinking about his reputation. It's very, I'm a religious man, this love is not accepted. Even though, again, is it love, is it fear? It's full of ambiguity. And in the morning, Van Chiu finds Gabriel Ernest on his couch. And what the boy says is, well, I was told to get out of the woods. Here I am. And the boy continues to be naked. Look, again, it's this feeling of not something so scary. It's almost like a hunt. The boy is playing with him. The boy knows exactly what he wants to do, and he's using this older man as a source of amusement. And Van Chiel is embarrassed and he covers his down there bits with a newspaper. And again, covering that part of himself, covering that sexual drive from his aunt right as his aunt comes in. This refusal to acknowledge that part of himself. And the aunt sees this naked homeless boy on the couch, and Van Chiel quickly makes up an excuse that, oh yeah, I just found him here, he doesn't really have a memory, he doesn't have a home. And the aunt sees this straight away as a chance to secure her status as this very caring woman. She's also thinking about only her own gain and doesn't even question the situation. She's happy. For her, this is almost like a gift, like a puppy, because look, I can protect this boy and raise my status in the eyes of all the other people who are religious in this community. And she decides to call him Gabriel Ernest. It has a lot of meanings associated with kindness, and Ernest, well, even the name Ernest brings to mind Ernest like honest, right? As a very genuine person. And even with Gabriel Ernest toying with Van Chiel, perhaps wanting to punish him for his arrogance, for his desire to see the boy for what he really is, Gabriel Ernest knows perfectly well what he's doing. He's the one who's outsmarting the adults. He knows the assumptions that they will make, and he uses them to his advantage. And I think this is perhaps the key message, more so than the homosexuality. It's the fact that Saki says that actually don't be condescending to children, don't be condescending to animals. They are far smarter than us and their nature can't be tamed. So all we need to do is accept it, and to avoid these situations where we deny them and then it comes back to bite us and it damages us. And Van Chiel, even seeing all this, even seeing that the dog left the house because it's terrified of Gabriel Ernest, that the canary stopped singing, his reaction is to just go and call the artist instead. He doesn't bother kicking Gabriel Ernest out. He doesn't fight against his aunt. He doesn't show some backbone. He calls the artist, and the artist says that he was going to draw the boy because he was so attractive, but then came sunset and the boy turned into a wolf. And Van Chiel rushes to try and get back home before anything bad happens. And so Van Chiel didn't really trust his first instincts, his righteous instincts, right? He was too distracted by the boy, by his own convictions, by his desire to appear a saint to the community, because what's he gonna say? Oh, this guy's a werewolf, right? They're gonna need proof. And because of this, because of his inability to, accept what he thinks and what he feels as valid, this happened. And when he gets back, he's told that Gabriel Ernest took a boy from the church, and he said to everyone that he'll make sure he gets home again, and then the two of them disappeared. And there was a loss of life that was there because of what Van Chiel did, because of him not being able to accept it. Because Gabriel Ernest knows perfectly well what he's doing isn't right, but he's accepting it and he's still being true to his nature. And this seems to urge us to reveal our true nature and our true thoughts, to recognize that part of ourselves that we don't recognize before. Okay, and I know I repeated that part a lot, but I just want to make sure and to make clear that I'm not just judging this story as like this repressed being of homosexuality just because of Saki's own biography, that I think that there are elements here that really prove that part of him. And this is more than just a story that we use to warn children against strangers and dangers. It's very clearly a critique of adults and of judgment and of stuffiness and of pretending that we know everything when we don't, of this arrogance and of not accepting our true nature. It's essentially saying that recognize what you feel and accept the way that people are, because it's killing our children. Do you want more death? Because your children are suffering because their love can't be in this world. So do you really want to continue this way? This is as much a call out by Saki of that as well. And I think that knowing that Saki never actually admitted that he's homosexual, I think this is as much a call for himself to be more brave, but he never really does it. So he is as much Van Chiel not recognizing that part of himself as he is Gabriel Ernest seeing that part of himself, and I think he believes that there is something inherently bad about it. And for me, the themes are suspicion, love, paranoia, and perhaps most of all, foolishness. The foolishness to not really even admit to mistakes even after you see that there are mistakes. And by not admitting that there were wrongs done by Van Chiel, by not really talking to himself about what has transpired and saying, maybe next time I shouldn't do this, he just passively doesn't attend the memorial and wants to seem sane to the rest of the community to feel accepted, and he doesn't say anything, there will be more death to come. And thus, Saki is sort of dooming our society as well in that regard, that adults don't want to admit their mistakes. They don't see it as a time where you can be wrong. That's youth, right? And so we can't learn from those mistakes either. So my overall thoughts are that I think this is a very interesting story with lots of twists, and that we can speculate about what the meaning is for a very, very long time. I think that's what makes it so successful, because if it was so obvious as to say, like, love yourself, right, we wouldn't be discussing it for centuries. And I want to ask you, what is the message for you? Is it a revenge tale against the aunts? Is it a message for acceptance, to accept that part of yourself even when society doesn't accept that part of you? Or is it to say to adults that stop being so focused on your reputation and start learning from your mistakes and actually think about what you're doing? Don't be arrogant and don't think you know everything. So I hope you enjoyed this short video. It's a short story, so a rather short video. Thank you again for watching, and see you next time.